All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a discussion about the utopian science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson. KSR is the Hugo Award winning author of several series, including the Mars trilogy, the Three Californias triptych, and many, many standalone novels such as The Years of Rice and Salt and Icehenge. I'm joined today by my good friend Paul, who can be credited with getting me to read Robinson's work. Paul has read all of KSR's novels, his short story collections, as well as several of Robinson's nonfiction books, High Sierra and The Ministry for the Future. I myself have read three: New York 2140, Aurora, and The Wild Shore. Paul, thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Um, well, I guess we can kick off our conversation. I really want to know what drew you to Kim Stanley Robinson's work to begin with, and then what was the tipping point when you decided that I am going to hunt down every single book that this man has written and read it and reflect on it and write blog posts about it?
So I first heard of Stanley. Uh, I think I heard an interview of him in a podcast back when I was in my first year of college, so probably like 2018, 2019. And It was a really cool interview where the hosts were asking him about like his work and his life a little bit. But the thing I remember most is he answered the call sitting on his porch, and you could hear like the birds and stuff. And he talked about that's where he writes, is he sitting outside on his little like porch or wooden table. And I really liked that. I just he gave off good energy, and there was what he was saying was really cool. And I had just started studying sociology, so I was interested in a lot of his. A lot of his works are about like social science more than technological science fiction. It's about how societies can change more than just the tools we have and technologies. So I was really interested in that, and I was getting more interested in environmental causes. I had just worked at a environmental nonprofit for 2 years. And so all of that really interested me, but I didn't actually read anything by him for another year or two until I was finishing college. And then I famously read New York 2140. Um, and my first read for that was a little bit eventful, where I was about halfway through. This was before I graduated college, so right at the start of the pandemic. I was finishing up my last semester at home, long distance, and I was halfway through 2140, and the in my area at my parents' house, a large storm came through and shut all the power off. We were under a tornado warning, and I finished New York 2140 during that, like over the course of that night. But at the point where I was sleeping on the couch watching the thunder and rain and stuff outside for my favorite scene in the book, which is when the characters experience a hurricane and kind of finally come together, which is what the whole book is about. And that scene left a really big impression on me. And then I just really felt moved by the sense of like community and positivity around climate change and community building and activism in that book. And I thought it was fun. So I thought it was a fun book. And so that was the first one I read, and I really liked it. It was fun and memorable. And then I slowly started reading more books by him over the next couple years. And I still don't like. I never claim that he's the best author, but I really think he always feels like someone who writes books exactly for me. So again, I am and my undergrad was in sociology with a minor in philosophy, and then my what I'm studying right now in a master's program is natural resources and
Mm-hmm.
a focus on global sustainability. And so it kind of feels like his books were designed for me specifically, because they're kind of big picture books about the changing of societies. And climate change has always been a part of his books, even going back to like the Three Californias, and Icehenge, but especially with the Mars books and then some of his recent books, he really, and just activism outside of his writing, he really is one of the most like passionate and effective climate change communicators. You mentioned in your, not to correct you, but in your opening spiel there, Ministry for the Future is fiction. It's not nonfiction. But
Oh, really? I thought
yeah,
it was nonfiction.
no,
Okay.
no, it's nonfiction, but it's nonfiction that starts now. Like, I don't remember if it's 2020 or 2025. It might be 2020 because I think it came out in 2018. I don't know,
Oh,
but
interesting.
it's science fiction that starts now, and talks about an environmental movement and like the things we could do to mitigate and maybe get on the road to reversing the negative effects of climate change. But the fun magic of the book is that it only uses like technology and policies that we could implement right now. Uh,
Mhm.
so it is fiction, but it is one of the books that is expressly designed to be possible to be nonfiction. And he has, since that book came out, he's gone on like hundreds of speaking tours, and he speaks at like UN climate change councils, and he's really been putting in the work. And literally, there are countries that have implemented policies citing Ministry for the Future as like inspiration or the starting point of their conversation. Uh, so he's doing a good job.
Yeah. You mentioned community earlier on when you were talking about New York 2140. And I think that's really what drew me to that book. And then, now that I've read 3 of his books, community has always been such a huge part of his books. And I find that really fascinating and unique from other science fiction that I've read. I haven't read a ton, but I really appreciate how he puts that emphasis on people helping people, and also the consequences of what happens when people don't help people and when they put their own agendas before just like being kind, decent people to your neighbors. Which, speaking of community, hello to everyone in the chat. Use Chicken, Hanan, and Michael. Thanks for being here and listening to us chat about KSR.
Oh, just really quick to jump off of that he focuses on the community aspect, and like lots of I agree that is something that lots of science fiction authors don't cover as much as Stanley. But one thing I wanted to add on to that is his books, in something that I've always enjoyed, like to focus on recreation as well, which I think stands out because it's not just the community. His characters often have hobbies, and like not just hobbies that are relevant to the plot and will be useful later, but more like characters will just like go rock climbing, or the way a character, a like maybe antagonist or a potential friend or ally will be met is just because a character was out doing something, because it was fun, not for any ulterior. There's no point for the plot, but lots and lots of page time sometimes is designated to recreation. And Stanley, of course, is a big outdoorsman. He likes to hike, so hiking is the most common one. But you can tell that Stanley loves baseball. You can tell that Stanley loves hiking. He's fascinated by rock climbing, but I know from High Sierra, his nonfiction, that he thinks rock climbers are, especially like free climbers, are insane. So he, as a hiker, he has a like little bit of a stigma against rock climbers, and yet they're all throughout his books. But it's not just the community building and seeing that community and the meaning that people have in their lives in his books. He really goes out of his way just to show that, like, in the utopias he envisions, there is room for people to live pleasant, enjoyable lives. And
Mhm.
like that is part of the point.
Yeah. I'm thinking when you mentioned recreation, I'm thinking of the opening scene of Aurora, where it's Freya and her father are sailing, and that scene is really fascinating because it takes place on a spaceship,
Mhm.
and there's this feeling of like freedom in that scene, and then there's almost like this closing in when you realize that this is actually taking place not on a planet but on a spaceship that is just huge, and has all these different biomes, and is a recreation of Earth in some ways, but also I think he mentions that it's a trillion times smaller than
Uh,
Earth. That's the ratio. Yeah, that's I love what you said about like it's not just the community, it's also it feels like its own world that KSR does. I guess world building is more of a fantasy thing, but he definitely does do world building in his books.
Agreed. Yeah, I love that opening scene in Aurora. Just it's a good little surprise where you think you oh hi Mark. It's a good little surprise where you think you're going to be you have going into a book about like a generation ship uh, going from Earth to a different star to try to colonize it. You come into it with a lot of preconceived notions or expectations, and you don't expect on the first page to be talking about a sailing ship, for sure. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, my experience reading it, so I read Aurora. I knew that I wanted to talk to you about Kim Stanley Robinson, so I picked up Aurora from the library, and I didn't know that it was gonna be about a generation ship. In fact, I learned what a generation ship was after reading this book. So when I opened the book up and was reading that first scene of them sailing on a lake, I just thought it was, like, on Earth, coming from reading New York 2140, where, Stanley describes Earth a lot, and there's scenes in New York 2140 that reminded me had that same sort of kinetic energy, when Franklin is, like, zooming through the canals of New York on his speedboat, or, I forget what the kids' names were, but they also have, like, a bunch of boat scenes, and I was just like, "Oh, this is on Earth, they're doing some sailing," and that realization hit me hard because of that.
Yeah, he loves his recreation. He'll show you he'll show you a new thing every time. I just wanted to go off of if Aurora is your first generation ship story, that's kind of crazy because it's a the whole point, like the moral of the story is um it kind of is saying that as a genre or even a concept
Mhm,
we should second guess our decision. Like
mhm.
it is not a given that humanity should try to colonize the stars. Uh,
Yeah,
and so the
which is
whole
a
point,
really radical
yeah,
notion.
yeah. And so if you have, that's just funny that you have not read any of the other books like that because that this specific book is a negation of the whole genre.
Mhm.
That this specific book is an argument that both this genre of books and maybe this whole idea as a potential next move for humanity shouldn't happen that way.
Yeah, I it Aurora is the one Kim Stanley Robinson book that I feel like I think about the most. Even though the experience of reading it, I there were parts that I didn't, super connect with, and that is partly due to the narrative choices that Robinson makes in writing that book, which I think are interesting actually, and we could talk about that. But the ideas and concepts that Robinson brings up, especially his critique of this notion of like, I don't know, just essentially saying that instead of looking out into the stars, and especially in I think in response to certain things like Elon Musk has said, like, "I'm gonna die on Mars," and all these things, and pushing back on that notion of, like, maybe we shouldn't take for granted that humans are going to have to die in order to further this what would you call it, mission to populate the stars. Maybe we should, like, focus on Earth. you know? And maybe that mission is a little more fraught than one might expect. Hard to talk about Aurora without spoilers,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Well, I can say that Aurora is the only Stanley book that takes place out of the solar system. So
oh,
he's
interesting.
yeah. So I've read I don't know how many of them are novels. It might be like 20 of his books are novels or something, and then counting short stories and whatnot. But that's the only one that is outside the solar system. Everything else takes place within it. And there's a couple of his books that are kind of, I think of as weird ones that are like a little bit beyond what he normally does, and that is one aspect that Aurora is clearly different than anything else he does.
Mhm.
But even within Aurora, like there isn't, it's not like Star Trek. There's no warp drive. There's no.
Yeah.
He stays firmly rooted in what he thinks is useful to discuss, and he very much is an ideas person.
Yeah,
Which
I think in science fiction, there's often this impulse to be like, well, the technology is just that good. And I think what he says here is a little bit more pragmatic, where he's like, technology can be really, really good and like light years ahead, pun intended, from what we have currently, and still not be necessarily enough, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and he finds useful. He finds like interesting stories to tell without using technology that is basically magic. Like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very much rooted in, like, science and not, yeah, just, like, taking science and stretching it
Mhm.
till it's very thin. Um,
I have no problem with like softer science fiction, but I think it's a strength of Stanley's that he has found so many interesting stories to tell in such a hard science fiction style where he makes everything seem plausible, and I think that's really useful for what his the larger messages of his books, because he makes like the utopias seem possible. It's
mhm.
not like, oh, we solved. It's not, oh, we can have a equitable society with great standards of living for everyone because we developed infinite free energy, and
Yeah,
therefore we no longer have scarcity. Like
yeah.
that's never that we can try to make people's lives good even without gambling on a magical solution.
Yeah, we have the tools for utopia now, which I think is a really beautiful and I don't even wanna say optimistic, I think it's just a really beautiful way of looking at the world, and it's the way that I want to look at the world. And I think that reading Kim Stanley Robinson's books, they're generally about really shitty situations, um, where you you would think that you wouldn't want to live in this world. For example, The Wild Shore is a sort of post-nuclear apocalyptic, setting, and yet the world that Robinson depicts in that feels like the kind of community that I would wanna be a part of even now. Um, I'm
Well,
yeah. Sorry,
Well,
go
in
ahead.
some way, no, you're fine. I interrupted you. In some ways, 2140 is like it. It's really hard to categorize because it feels, when you first describe it, or depending on how you describe it, it seems like, well, obviously that's like that's sounds awful, and yet it sounds like it starts in a dystopia, and yet when you look at it, when you zoom out a little bit, putting it in the year 2140, what's happening is actually that's far enough in the future that humanity has just started, that in the trend of climate change, we've either flattened or maybe started to bend the line of suffering down, and that,
Mhm.
and so like the period of change that's happening around the characters, it still feels like there's so many problems, and you can see that everything, so much of their society is still like broken in ways that we are expecting our society to be broken. But
Yeah.
the the utopian and the hopeful part of 2140 is it genuinely feels like things are getting better. Even if it's hard, things are getting better just a little bit. And it's such an interesting period of the future to show. Um, and I think it's a much more interesting period than just saying let's zoom forward to show when everything's bad. But instead, he goes a little bit further and shows when things are still bad, but they might be getting better, and we could help them get better faster. And I think that's a really unique idea that I've never seen any other book cover.
Yeah, he's good at finding those sort of like gray areas, the in between, where it's not quite all figured out, but it's also not quite all doomed.
Mhm.
Um, I was just thinking about one of my favorite parts in New York 2140, which is where how would you even call her? Like an Amelia Earhart type character is transporting polar bears in an airship. And yeah, I feel like that scene is so crazy because it's first of all, it's just crazy that she's transporting polar bears on this airship, but it really like exemplifies how Robinson is just willing to like think of these crazy ways that people would be still working towards improving the earth and that might look like someone literally taking polar bears from one place in the earth and transporting them to a place where they can actually live and like taking a really active role in fixing things.
Yeah, Amelia is an influencer. Like she's a streamer conservationist,
Mhm.
and there's even like yeah, I think that's really it's fun, and also her situation being unique, or going off of like her trying to solve the problem of polar bears losing their habitats in an unusual way. And I think a very recognizable way for an influencer is kind of without authority. She's bringing polar bears to a place that they like, not their habitat. She's just transporting them to a new place that they don't grow naturally, and we see like a little bit of pushback, like there's in a very recognizable way. Someone with good intentions is doing something. An influencer with good intentions is trying to help an environmental problem by transplanting a species to somewhere it's not native, so creating like an invasive species. And people online are very mad at her, but also she has lots of fans, and you see her like debate those people live in front of the camera, her talk to her chat about the haters that are saying you might be destroying a different ecosystem. Like that's a fun little side story. And in 2140 there's like 13 characters that the story bounces between, so you get
Mhm.
lots of those little tangents that pull
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, the community is really the main character of
Mhm.
2140. I wanted to highlight this comment from Hanan. I've been wondering what I should pick up next by KSR. You've made Aurora sound so interesting. And this is one of the things that I wanted to discuss in the stream is um, what do you think is a good place for someone who doesn't normally read sci-fi to start with KSR? Or alternatively, what about someone who does love science fiction? What would you recommend to that reader?
Yeah, so um, Stanley's most famous series is the Mars trilogy. So if you want to jump into something just to see what he's known for, Red Mars is a good starting point. Um, my favorite book is Icehenge, and I can talk about Icehenge forever. It's a short little book, and it's like deep, moody themes, and uh, oh hi. So I love Icehenge, and I can talk about that forever. And it's short, which makes it a good starting point. But then, if you are not a sci-fi reader, you could read. He has several books that are not science fiction, and I think they're interesting places to start. We've mentioned Rice and Salt a little bit. There we see it in the chat. Um, I like Rice and Salt a lot, and you can see some of his historical fiction, which he discusses interesting topics and really goes places in Rice and Salt because it covers like 700 years of history. The premise of that one is the Black Death, the Black Plague, instead of killing a third of Europe, kills 97%. And so that's the branching point for this alternate history. And so you basically see 700 years of world history without European cultures. And so it's very much about East Asian, and we even see like Native American cultures, and everything shifts, and it as the timeline gets further, the world becomes more and more unrecognizable, and it's just hugely ambitious. I love Rice and Salt. I think that's a good one for non readers. It is a dense, heavy book. If you want something a little bit lighter, Shaman is a good one. Again, it's on his weird side because this one is set 32,000 years ago. It's in the Ice Age, and it's a coming
Oh.
of age story in the Ice Age. And it's basically the characters are, the thought experiment was Stanley imagining what life would be like for the people who drew the famous cave paintings in France. That's
Mm.
that's the premise of Shaman. And it's a really interesting look at what a like nomadic lifestyle would be, and a society like before writing, before all kinds of technologies and even language tools that we know and understand. And yet he still shows how these people are living recognizably, that they're like intelligent, interesting people, and they're trying to understand, um, he lots of his books cover science and scientists, like scientists as hero is something, he covers a lot. And so even in Shaman, you can see characters that are trying to understand and improve the world through something close to the scientific method, even though they don't have any of the words to talk about it like that.
Mhm.
And also just the way he describes them, like living with the seasons and stuff, is it's a really interesting, beautiful book, and it's a good coming of age story. So Shaman is a good kind of weird.
Yeah. That reminds me a little bit of Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and how, like, a lot of times indigenous knowledge and practices are science, are scientific, but they don't fall into like sort of Western, like more rigid ideas of the scientific method, which you can sort of derive the scientific method from first principles. Um, so yeah, that sounds really interesting, and I'm so excited to read more Kim Stanley Robinson. I think my immediate TBR is I want to finish the Three Californias triptych. Um, as someone who used to live in California, that is definitely one of the ones that I'm most excited about. But also Years of Rice and Salt, which Used Chicken, who is in the chat, has read and loved, and it just sounds so fascinating to me. What would you recommend? What
For you,
if you could choose what I read next from Kim Stanley Robinson? What would you make me read?
well, I've told you before that you would really love High Sierra, which is
Mm.
nonfiction, and
Mhm.
specifically, it feels like Braiding Sweetgrass, where it's a mix of like personal asides and science, but
Mhm.
it's about his decades as a hiker, which has been like the true passion of his life, other than literature, and so he spent like years of his life in the mountains, basically, if you add all up all the trips. And the High Sierra, it's called High Sierra, a love story, because it is his love letter to the mountains. And so the chapters are structured in like personal memories, which he usually calls moments of being, and those are
Oh,
like,
I love that.
yeah. So those are really just like evocative and meaningful times. Most of them spent alone, just in the mountains, or like at night, or thinking about things. But then other chapters are about just like geology, or the history, or why this mountain is named after this person, and who Stanley thinks it should be named after instead. There's a whole chapter about the names we should replace, in
Mm.
the Sierra Nevada, because those people don't deserve to have mountains named after them. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and it's a great time. It's a really easy read, and the audiobook is gorgeous if you want to do the audiobook.
I
Um,
think I will,
okay.
because I know Chris and Alon,
Mhm.
our friends, read the audiobook or listened to the audiobook and said it was fantastic, and I also believe you when you say it, but I think I will do that as audio.
Stanley narrates it, and it's just like story time with Stanley. It sounds like campfire tales for 20 hours or something. I adore it.
Good night, Mark. Thanks for joining.
Mark.
Max Garfield said that he's read the Mars trilogy, 2312, Aurora, New York 2140, and plans to read Shaman and the Three California trilogy. What is MBR?
Maybe read, maybe.
Oh, I haven't really looked into 2312. What is 2312 about?
2312 is set in the year 2312, and it's about two characters, one of whom is a designer of. So 2312 is set in the period of Stanley's overarching timeline where humanity is spreading out amongst the solar system, so like populating all the various asteroid belts and stuff. We're just filling up all the little niches, and as part of spreading out to different planets and even living on asteroids in tiny little enclosed ecosystems. The types of environments people are designing are becoming weirder. So humanity is diversifying and spreading out, and there's so many different people living different kinds of lives that no one can know everything that's going on anymore.
Oh, that's fascinating.
In the last blog post I made where I talk about his overarching timeline, this is the accelerando where things are moving so fast and it's becoming like decentralized, just people spreading out all over the place. And so one of the main characters in 2312 is a habitat designer. So what she does is she designs custom ecosystems for people to live in those asteroids that have been hollowed out and then filled in with whatever, like deciding how fast to spin them for a custom gravity, or if you want it to be full of nature, like this is also during a period where they have like genetic engineering, and that's a big part of the book. So even human bodies can look nothing like our bodies. People are modifying and changing their bodies willy-nilly, which also conveniently it's his most pro transgender book. That one is the main character. Well, basically, it is more common than not for characters to be not just one gender, or for that to change throughout their lives, because lives are much longer with medical science. And so it's just about all the weird ways people are living when we have that much freedom and control over our bodies and the places we can live in. It's not my favorite book, but it was really interesting. It to me felt like it had little bits of a lot of his books in it, and I enjoyed it less than most of those other books that it was borrowing ideas from. But I love the two main characters. I think the two main characters are really, really good, and specifically Swan, the engineer, is I really like her. Her struggle in that book is a lot of internal stuff, because with all of the genetic and physical modification, she feels detached. She has all these memories of past versions of her that she can't identify with anymore, and she doesn't know who she wants to be in the future. And so she's getting very existential about what kind of person she is and who she wants to be in decades further into the future, where a different version of her could decide to, change genders or like have a completely different body than the one she has right now. So she's dealing with a lot of stuff, and I really, really like her. So
that sounds fascinating. Interesting. I think or not she, but I think something Kim Stanley Robinson does really well is balance internal and external conflict. By Max Garfield, by Hanan, lots of European and down under watchers. But yeah, Kim Stanley Robinson does a good job of balancing that internal conflict in all of his books really well. So you mentioned your blog. I want to talk about your project of ranking all of Kim Stanley Robinson's novels that you've read, which is all of them. what was something that surprised you in doing that ranking, if anything at all? What was that like, that process? And have you ever done that before for any other author, reading their entire bibliography? And what was that like? And was it difficult? What came up for you?
It was a lot of fun. The thing that surprised me most, well, first of all, I've never done that for another author or like set out with a project to do that.
Mhm.
Um, there are authors that I've read every book of just because they've only had a couple books, or I read them as they were released or something. But
Mhm.
specifically setting out to read everything by Stanley was a first, and I enjoyed it, and which is why I'm going to do it again next year with Le Guin, which is kind of,
Oh,
yeah, which is fun, and ties to Stanley because Stanley was Ursula K. Le Guin's student. He was in her writing
yes.
classes, uh,
Uh-huh.
but I got distracted. Surprises in reading everything and ranking them. Um, I realized as I read more throughout the last year and a half, and this was part of why I wanted to read all of them, was I started reading some of his older stuff, and he's been writing for almost 50 years now. I think like 45, because the first, let's see, his first book came out in like 81. I think Icehenge was 82, which was book two.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so Wild Shore would probably be 81. Um, so he's been writing for a long time. And when I started reading some of those older books, especially Icehenge, I found that I loved his older writing.
Ah,
Which is
interesting.
what, when I first read Icehenge, I was like, well, now I have to read everything because I love that book so much. And his old books have a different feel than the new books. And I realized that he was much more than just like a climate change author, where a lot of basically all of his recent books have been about climate change. So like
Yeah, 'cause
140 and Ministry for the Future. Uh,
mhm.
Aurora, I guess, was also in there, and that's more of a classic sci-fi. But I had an impression of him as the climate guy.
Mhm.
And reading Icehenge and then uh, like Mars trilogy and all those, he really has a lot more to say, and I was super excited to read it.
Yeah. The Wild Shore is actually you can sort of look at it sideways and think of it as a climate change novel, but it's really a nuclear, post-apocalyptic nuclear novel.
Yes, but like when you think about in Wild Shore, so much of it is about the landscape and the land recovering from people.
Yeah.
And if the catastrophe that shuts down society is a nuclear attack, uh, this you could tell the same, most of the, like lots of the same descriptions for and the optimism of nature returning to the nature popping up around them, and the characters revitalized like relationship to nature. All of that feels very climate changey. um,
Yeah.
and that feeling gets stronger when you read the other California books.
Mhm.
It, especially Pacific Edge, which is, of the three California books, are three alternate versions of California. One, The Wild Shore, is like post-apocalyptic. After the bombs fall, America's gone, but the survivors are rebuilding some kind of. It almost feels like a fantasy book, like small village life. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and then we have Gold Coast, which is like a true 80s dystopia, like RoboCop picture, something like that. But it's all concrete megastructure. Things are built for cars, not for people. And then the third one is Pacific Edge, which is the utopia one. So this is if things go right. And so it's a version of Orange County where people are living with the land and are living sustainably and happily, and have uh, and so when you look at all three of those together, it's clear that Stanley is saying these are three roads we could go down. uh,
Mhm.
and the final one very much is about climate stuff, and that, so all the way back in the 80s he was still talking about this.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. Um, okay, what else do I have on my list of questions? We talked about the ranking. So I guess it would be interesting to ask you about your least favorite Kim Stanley Robinson book.
I have a pretty firm answer. I don't like Red Moon. I think Red Moon is bad, uh, and I don't think it's bad in really interesting ways. It's also pretty recent. I think it might have been like 2016 or something. I just kind of think it's a bad book, which is unfortunate. And so, in all of his books, that's the only one I really don't recommend. I don't think there's much there. There's a little bit of interesting stuff. Um, so it's set very close in the future, and it's just about people starting permanent colonies on the moon. But really, the it's more speculative about the political landscape of the near future.
Hmm.
um, and so it's about like the conflict. It's about imagining a multipolar future, uh, with the United States and China, basically.
Hmm.
And so it's and that part's interesting. I think the like political speculation is interesting. There's some fun stuff. There's an amazing scene, and I don't feel bad ruining the best scene in the book because I don't want you to read this book. You just pick any other of his books, and I'll be happier if you read that one. But there is one amazing scene in Red Moon where the characters are on the moon and they see an eclipse. So they see the Earth go between
Oh.
the moon and the sun, right?
Hmm.
And it goes black like you would, because so from Earth to the moon, the way perspective works, Earth is going to look the same size. Like it's gonna the the moon and Earth are going to look the same size if you're standing on one versus the other because it's the same distance between them. Um, but so it perfectly blocks the sun as you would expect for an eclipse, but then little lights blink back in and it looks like twinkling stars on inside the dark spot, and it's because you can see the lights of cities on the Earth in the
Oh.
eclipse. And I love that scene. I think that scene is brilliant. Most of the book though, not very good.
Yeah, I think that thinking back to the Wild Shore, I think that when KSR gets like explicitly political in like actual American politics is when I'm least interested in him. Would you agree with that?
uh I don't know if I agree with that, or like I don't agree with the generalization, but there are specific points where the politics are part of the books that can feel the most dated.
Mhm.
For example, like the in Red Mars and a bunch of his early stuff, he was talking about the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union still, and like reading that today, uh, Red Mars is set in 2025. Like they land on Mars in 2025, and the it's the Soviet Union and the United States that are establishing this colony.
Mhm.
And so like there's the I think because when he is explicitly political, it places him like in his time.
Yeah,
Uh,
maybe that's what I mean, I guess. Because I'm thinking of the Wild Shore and there's a lot of references to like specifically Reagan era politics. And I'm comparing it to Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, which is also uh, a response to that. And I think it just pales in comparison to what Butler does.
I agree. I agree on that. Although they both did use the Reagan "Make America Great Again."
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So Wild Shore was 81, and the very Trumpian figure did did say "Make America Great Again" many times, which I think is interesting. But maybe I do agree with you because thinking on Green Earth, which is a omnibus version of his Science in the Capital trilogy,
Hmm.
which are, again are very much climate change books. Uh, they they very much when I read them, part of I had initially a hard time getting into the first book in this omnibus because it just felt like it's a very political book and it's literally just about politics. Like that's what the whole book is about. It's called
Hmm.
Science in the Capital because it's about building an environmental movement, specifically a political movement. And reading the first book, I could not separate it from how very, very Bush era this book was. Like
Mm,
it very much is Bush era,
yeah.
both in what the like realm of the possible for both like what the conflicts and how people talk about like climate change or climate denial or stalling on climate, and in the just yeah so just like the whole conversation did feel was hard for me to get into. And then by the time that I started getting into the heads of the characters and it became a story about the characters and their lives changing rather than just the politics, I enjoyed it more. So maybe I do agree with you.
Yeah, I think once you start to get very specific into politics, like you said, it dates it, and it. Whereas I think Robinson is best when he's talking about the far future, or yeah, just the far future or the far past in Years in Rice and Salt. I do want to ask you about your Le Guin project. To go on a tangent, um, how much Le Guin have you read?
um a, a decent amount. I've read like three short story collections, and I've read the Dispossessed, the word for world is forest, and um the Lathe of Heaven, and then the first two Earthsea books.
Mm.
So I,
Interesting, because I've only read Earthsea, except for the last two Earthsea books, and Lavinia, and a couple of her short stories. So I really think of Le Guin as a fantasy author, but I'm curious, do you see, or I guess how do I phrase this? What aspect or what book of Kim Stanley Robinson's do you think is the most Le Guin-esque?
interesting, interesting. Um, so, well, I've also read Left Hand of Darkness, but um, let's see. The most Le Guin-esque, I think Le Guin, the thing about her is the feeling of like radical imagination and empathy, where she is challenging the reader to imagine different kinds of lives, and like especially as a sci-fi author, which is more of what I've read from her, and like in her short stories, and then the few of her sci-fi novels I've read.
Mhm.
I think of her as like challenging our ideas of what is possible, and yes, I'll stop there before I ramble. As far as what is Stanley's most Le Guin book, um, it might be Icehenge, just because Le Guin, lots of Le Guin books feel more focused than Stanley's do.
Mhm.
Um, and Icehenge is very focused, and it knows what it's trying to tell, and the thing it's telling is not just it is also very much a like internal broodiness that I think is in some of Le Guin's best work. Um, Thinking of like The Dispossessed and Left Hand of Darkness. Uh, so it might be Icehenge, but I don't know. I don't know if I feel confident on that. I might. I don't think it's any of the climate books. Mars trilogy is too much its own thing. Um, it might be Icehenge by default, because I can't think of anything else that fits super well.
Yeah. That's a sort of unfair question. I just wanted to see if there was anything, given that Robinson was a student literally
Uh-huh.
of Le Guin's, if that shows up in his work at all.
Well, I do know that Le Guin, one of the first like bits of encouragement as a writer he got was Le Guin reading what became the second third of Icehenge, and telling him to write more things like this.
Mm.
Uh,
She also blurbed The Wild Shore,
yes, yes, yeah.
which is
Oh,
very
and
cool.
this is a fun story. I know Rid knows this, but they saw Star Wars together. Stanley and Le Guin sat next to each other when they saw Star Wars for the first time, which
That's crazy.
I know, that's so cool. And they thought it was hilarious. They thought it was a very funny parody of
Really
yeah, yeah. They were
interesting.
apparently laughing the whole time.
I
Uh,
have seen episode. Is it episode 4?
yes, for
Um, yeah, it is a kind of a goofy movie.
yeah, it's just it's using the tropes. Like it's very, it does its job. It knows what kind of story it wants to tell, and obviously it spawned a whole thing. I'm not a Star Wars person, so
Yeah. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan either. I mean, I don't really like Star Wars. I remember watching episode 9, The Force Awakens, I think. And I actually really loved it. And it was because I hadn't seen any of the original movies. I was sort of like, wow, this is like very cool. And everyone else was like, wow, this is the same thing that they did in episode like the first movie. But to me, it was new. So I was like, this is great. Which often happens to me with, I feel, a lot of different things where I read something that's derivative of something else. And I think it's just great because I haven't read the thing that it's derivative of. Um,
I think this
what
Michael guy has a good idea.
about actual stars fighting? I would read that. I think that should be Kim Stanley Robinson's next book.
Oh yes, yes.
I do want to ask you. So it seems like you're interested in KSR's earlier work, where he's not as focused on climate and climate fiction. Is that something you'd like for him to return to as science fiction that's not as concerned with climate fiction? If that
It's
makes
not.
sense.
I do. I would love. I would love. I do think old Stanley is my favorite Stanley.
Mhm.
He's just a bit weirder, and I feel like in recent years he has kind of got locked into a brand or a style,
Mhm.
in a way that I think it's good, but I'd like him to be weird again. All these new books are too mainstream for me. I need to go back to the band's first album. I'm a real fan. But I do know, so he might be working right now on a second nonfiction book. He might be doing a nonfiction book similar to High Sierra about
Mm.
Antarctica.
That's
Which
cool.
yeah, yeah, which Antarctica is really important for Stanley books because he was picked twice by the National Science Foundation for a grant to go and do like an artist stay at McMurdo. So
That's cool.
yeah, he's gone to Antarctica twice, and as an artist paid to be there to do art and have inspiration, and because of that he wrote Antarctica, which is literally about McMurdo and other places, and you can really feel his experience. But also, um, Antarctica and the High Sierras are kind of how he painted such a clear picture of Mars, in very famously in the Mars trilogy,
Mhm.
imagining the barren landscapes and like the inhospitable nature and like the idea of a scientific colony. All of that comes from, or at least in part, is very much influenced by his stays in Antarctica. And in Antarctica, um, so I do know he might be working on that. And the article or the interview I saw of where he said that mentioned that it might come out this year. I don't think that's going to happen at this point, but maybe next year. So I do know he might be working on another nonfiction, which, if it's as good as High Sierra, I would be stoked for. I really, really liked High Sierra, and that's one that I have been recommending to more people than I expected. And then, but yeah, I would like him to be a little bit weirder, and not only do climate stuff. Just because I agree with him. I
Mm.
agree with you, Stanley, but also, uh, I don't know. I want something new. I want something interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
that's my answer.
Well, I feel like you'll probably get weirder stuff with Le Guin because I feel like her science fiction is super out there
Mhm.
and weird. Um, I'm imagining what do you think a Kim Stanley Robinson fantasy novel would be like?
Well, he does have one, kind of, the a short, sharp shock, which is
Ooh.
a bad name for alliteration. But it's kind of his only fantasy. It's about it's like a long dream journey book, where a character wakes up washed up on the beach of islands called the Spine. And so the world is like water all the way around. It seems like a water world where there's no land except for these islands that go in a chain along the
Um,
equator or something.
uh-huh.
And each island is like populated by a different weird people, and logic doesn't quite make sense. And it's full of like symbolism about like mirrors and doppelgangers and doubles, and so it's full of lots of weird imagery. But it's not a traditional fantasy book. It's very much like each chapter kind of reads like a little bit like a little parable. It's very purple prosy and strange. So that's the closest thing he's written to a fantasy book. Um, but I know from reading some of his essays about fantasy authors that he did like that he does not like long. He feels like fantasy is often too long, and that
Really?
it should like I don't think he would be an epic fantasy person. I think he would say that like Brandon needs an editor or something. Uh, I think he would.
New York 2140 is like 800 pages,
It's 800 pages for
but
sure.
it's one book. So I guess he doesn't like series, maybe.
The Mars trilogy is really his own. Well, I guess that's not true. The Science in the Capital. He has two trilogies and then a triptych. Uh, but yeah,
That
so
doesn't really count as a series because they're standalone books,
they are, but
essentially.
they're definitely in conversation with each other.
Yeah, like a triptych.
They're the character of Tom, who's great. Tom is in every book.
Oh, I
So
did not
the
know that.
Yeah, and so in Wild Shore, Tom's dreams of meeting himself and like alternate versions of himself.
Oh,
There are alternate versions of him
that
in
was a weird part. I I feel like I read that part and I was like, "Huh, that was weird." That was like magic. And I never interrogated that
it's just
more.
an old man lying. Don't worry about it.
Well, yeah, yeah, it was kinda that. That was kinda the vibe I got. Interesting. Well, I'm excited to read The Three Californias, and, I think you mentioned Icehenge,
God,
but
such
I
a
think I'm
book.
gonna read I have this thing with series where I have to finish the series before I move on, so I'm gonna finish The Three Californias
That's fair.
before,
That's fair. I'm
um
very curious to see if you'll like the second one.
Me
The
too.
second the second one is the one I think you might dislike, but we'll see.
Interesting. I haven't outright disliked any of Robinson's work so far, and that's 3 books that I've
Mhm.
read, so that's pretty good batting average.
Wild Shore is just, or not Wild Shore, Gold Coast. Gold Coast is the most like dystopic. The characters are often just unlikable because
Mhm.
they're bad people living in a bad society, and
Yeah.
like see how that they don't have the opportunity to live good lives or even engage meaningfully with the world around them. And so like I could very much see someone just not enjoy reading it because like they're awful, and they're awful in interesting ways to me. I found it an enjoyable read, and was able to separate, but also I don't know.
I mean, outside of science fiction, I do like reading about unlikable characters. I'm thinking of Otessa Moshfegh, probably some other authors I'm forgetting right now, but I like reading about unlikable characters, especially when the author is aware that they're unlikable and is doing something with that. And having the context surrounding KSR and knowing what he's normally like, I might actually enjoy the edge of him doing something a little bit less less optimistic. I will say like most of his works are always optimistic, but I think he always has consequences, and it's not all hunky dory. It's always like always sort of a hard won optimism in his books.
It's yeah. They like he's called a utopian author, but his utopias are never finished. They're always like utopia in progress, where
Hmm.
people are having to fight to for progress to not backslide, or it's hard to try to improve your world, but it's worth doing anyway.
Yeah, his characters are always working, and it always feels like you're coming into the story in the middle of these characters' lives, and there's a before and there's going to be an after with Kim Stanley Robinson's worlds. Well, Paul, before I let you go, I'm just curious, what are you reading right now?
So for my family book club, we're reading The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which is a favorite of mine. Uh,
Hmm.
I read it last year. Last year, it was on the ballot to be the book for November, and it lost. But I and several other family members read it anyway. So half of the club has already read it, and we're reading it again. Um, so we're reading Donna Tartt, and then last night I just started East of Eden by Steinbeck.
Ooh, nice.
So I've enjoyed Steinbeck a lot this year, and I'm going
Another
to
California
yeah,
writer.
uh-huh. And so I'm gonna hopefully get through that one. But I've only read one chapter, so I don't know if I'm gonna stick with it. Um, yeah, those are the two.
Yeah, Secret History is a great example of unlikable characters who are just utterly and unendingly readable.
Mhm.
I love the Secret History. Well, Paul, is there anything else you would like to say while you have this platform about Kim Stanley Robinson or otherwise? Actually, you should plug your blog, which I've linked down below, and people should go check out your ranking of Kim Stanley Robinson's all of his books. I linked part one, spoiler free. Just it's really interesting to read people's rankings, and it's a great way to sort of get the lay of the land when it comes to an author to read a ranking. Highly recommend that. I also linked one of my favorites of your blog posts, um, your day off when you unfortunately got hacked. But yeah, anything you want to leave us with?
I think my best blog post, my favorite, is one of my first ones about the manga Hajime no Ippo. So I think I don't know what it's called. Let me see. It's called Chasing the Next Step. Yeah. I really like that blog post. I think that's my favorite I've done. It's about my favorite boxing manga. So it's a sports manga about a simple boy who's just trying to become. He wants to know what it means like to be strong, which is a very vague term, and that's why we're on chapter 1,500 and counting, because there's no answer to that question, but that's what he's asking himself. He doesn't want to be the strongest. He just wants to know, what does it feel like to be strong? And so
Interesting.
it's a series about internal growth, even though it's like ostensibly a sports manga about punching people. And so that blog post is about my annual ritual of reading that. Every year, I wait a full year for new chapters to come out, and then I catch up around my birthday, which is the end of October. So just last week, I finished and read the most recent chapter, and I just wait to see how much he's grown in the couple chapters that have come out since I last read. And some years I
Um,
start from the beginning on chapter one and then read 1400, now 1500. Um, and it's been something I've done for years, and seeing Ipo grow and me grow as I get older. I just love that series. It's internal. It's all about just him deciding what he wants to do in his life. Uh, really resonated me as a young adult. Um, yeah, so I think that's the best thing I've written on my blog. But no, I don't have anything I need to plug. If you're gonna read Stanley, I do love Ice Henge. Ice Henge is my favorite. Uh,
and join the Discord and talk to Paul about Kim Stanley Robinson and
Yeah,
us and the rest of us.
I do have notifications turned on, so I get a ping every time anyone says anything in the Stanley chat. I think I even get one if someone reacts to something. So
Wow, that's great. Good to know.
I respond quickly. I do.
Ray said, just caught the tail end of this. I'm going to watch this now with my dinner. I only just heard about this author from you guys this year, but his work sounds so intriguing. Ray, I hope you enjoy. I think you said earlier that you were going to start with New York 2140. So I hope you enjoy that. That's where I started and where Paul started as well. So I think it's a good starting point. Flower Pixel said, I love rankings. Me too. Michael said, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Red. Great show and discussion. Great comment, Michael. And
And then
Javi
Javi
said,
slammed the keyboard when I started talking about Ebo.
oh, is that what it was about? I thought he just was. I thought that was just Javi being Javi. Paul gets a shock to the brain if you even think about KSR for a second.
I have thought about this because Mayor will attest. There was a period a couple months ago where I would look at my phone would not be up or like Discord would not be up, and I would look at Discord exactly 5 seconds before Mayor would post about Stanley. And so I wasn't even getting the ping. I was there to watch the little writing bubbles start. And I don't know why it kept happening, but it happened like 12 times in like a I don't know, a month period. Whenever Mayor was writing about Stanley, I was looking at it. So
Hell yeah. I love that. Well, Paul, I hope you've inspired legions of people to read KSR after this stream and that you never know rest and you're constantly being bombarded by telepathic messages about KSR. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. This was amazing. Thank you for evangelizing about KSR and getting me to read his books. It's been really great. And maybe we can do this again when I've read more KSR and we can do a discussion. I think especially a spoiler discussion of one of his books, especially like Aurora, would be great. But thanks so much, Paul. And thank you everyone for who was in the chat. Appreciate you all. Love you all. And have a good night. Take care.